I want you to imagine you're going out for the evening. You got an amazing evening planned. You're going to a show, but first you're going out for dinner. You're planning on going to one of your favorite restaurants. It's a top-end steakhouse, a little expensive, but fabulous steaks. You're looking forward to it. You even put a suit on for the occasion. You don't normally wear a suit, but you wore a suit today, monogrammed cuffs, pin collar. You look fabulous. And your partner in a long evening gown. You've even washed your car for the occasion. You get up to head out, and all of a sudden you got a stabbing pain in your foot. You take a step, and there it is again. You realize you got a stone in your shoe. At that moment, you're not thinking, nor do you care about the dinner at the steakhouse. You don't care about the show. You care about one thing and one thing only, getting rid of that stone in your shoe. And until you do, the evening's done. You can't concentrate on anything else. Well, that's exactly the same way it is in real estate when you own investment property. If you followed my plan, a simple plan, buying one property a year for 10 years, you followed that, and now you've got your 10 properties, and they're a mixture, singles, duplexes, triplexes. You might have 15 or 16 tenants. And maybe, say 16, and maybe 15 of them are fabulous tenants. They look after the property, they pay the rent on time, they're just gems. But you got one tenant that is a nightmare. You drive by and on the lawn there's cars up on blocks, there's garbage laying around, you're always chasing them for rent, they're behind. It's just a nightmare. You can't concentrate on the 15 great tenants. All you can think about is that stone in your shoe, that one tenant that brings a nightmare to your life as a landlord. I remember the first time I rolled out my Money Machine seminar. It was back in 1989. And people weren't used to an investment seminar. We had a huge turnout. And as a result of that, I met a couple that were there that wanted to buy an investment property. I took them around and showed them some property, and they ended up falling in love with a semi-detached. Now, it was over-improved probably as a rental. It had beautiful replacement hardwood floors. It was a showpiece. But they bought it, and right away they threw an ad back then in the paper, and they took the first applicant they got, a tenant from hell. And that tenant was a problem behind the rent, causing all kinds of damage to the property. They eventually got rid of that tenant, went back in, cleaned up, restored it back to the condition it was in before, stuck another ad in the paper, made the same mistake, rented it out to the first tenant that came along. You guessed it, got another tenant from hell. Well, at that point, they came to see me and they wanted to sell the property. I did everything I could to talk them out of it, but I couldn't. They wanted to get rid of that property. Didn't matter if they lost money. They've had enough of being a landlord. They were done. Thinking back, I should have offered to manage it for them for a year. If they hung on to that property, today it would have been paid off. It would have between double and triple what they paid for it, and it would have given them $1,300 to $1,500 a month after expenses as passive income. It would have been fabulous if they hung on to it. But they had to get rid of that stone, and in so doing, they got rid of the shoe. Now, there's no guarantees that you're going to avoid the tenant from hell. We've all made that mistake. We've all had a bad tenant at one time or another. But there's things you can do to mitigate the risk. And I want to share with you some of the things that I learned over the years that I think can help you avoid a bad tenant if at all possible. The first thing I've said before is start with having a quality unit. Now don't go with the couple I gave the example of where it's over-improved to the point that perhaps you're going to see a lot of damage because of the way it's done up. But try and have it in a good area and a good quality unit, something you'd live in yourself. Because if it's that type of property, you're going to attract a better quality tenant. The other thing is avoid above market rent. I've seen landlords crank it up to the very top dollar they can get out of the unit, and the person that rents it doesn't care what the rent is because they can't find any place because they're a bad tenant, and often they're not planning on paying any more than the first month rent anyway. So have it a little lower than the market rent and a quality property, and you've got a better selection of tenant to pick from. When I say selection, one of the things that's very important is the application form. make sure you've got a good application form, and I'll share one with you at the end of this video, and you can download it if you like and use it. But get an application form that gives you a lot of information, and don't accept a deposit. When you accept a deposit, you're kind of making a commitment. Unless you got a real strong reason to turn them down, you're stuck with them. So you have each prospective tenant fill in an application form, and then you carefully go through the application forms, do your due diligence, and pick the best one. So take your time, but in the application form, the most important thing, in my opinion, is the past history. You want the references of the past landlords, not the current landlord. You'll speak to the current landlord, but you want to talk to the past landlords. And so you want to see how long they've lived, where they've lived. And when I speak about how long they've lived, if on the application form you see they've moved every 6 months, don't touch them. They'll tell you, oh, I know, but it was because of this and it was because of that. My whole goal is to stay put. I'm going to be a long-term tenant. But they won't. Their past behavior indicates their future behavior, and their whatever reason, their lifestyle or whatever, they're going to move in 6 months from your unit. And the last thing you want is frequent turnover, because you got to go through the rental process again. You probably have to spiff it up. You may have to paint it. There's things you're going to have to do. You're looking for long term. So if they move frequently, that's a signal to you. The other thing is when you're sitting down talking to them, if they tell you they've had nightmares of past landlords and that's why they're moving, that should be a red flag to you. Anybody can have a bad landlord, and there certainly are bad landlords out there. But if they've had example after example after example of bad landlords, and that's the reason they're moving, the chances are it's them, not the landlord. I've had people tell me, and I zero down. I want to know why they're moving. I want to know why they moved from here to here, why they moved from here to here. And they'll tell me, well, it only had an exterior stairs. Well, didn't it have an exterior stairs when you rented it? Well, it was too small. Well, wasn't that size when you rented it? And they're finding fault with the unit, but they made the commitment to rent it. And it speaks, again, to their nature of longevity. And the other thing I think is a red flag, not a guaranteed red flag, but it can be, is the reason they're moving is the landlord needs the unit for himself or for a family member. I want to imagine you have a triplex, and you have a legitimate family member who needs a unit. In that triplex, you got two wonderful tenants and one marginal tenant. Which tenant are you likely to give notice to and replace him with your son? The problem tenant. So if the tenant tells you that they're having to move because the place is needed by the landlord's family or up for sale perhaps, you got to look at that and say, I wonder if part of the problem is the tenant themselves causing grief to the landlord. This is no guarantees, but I hope it gives you a few guidelines. As I said, I've got an application form that you can download. And next week, we're going to carry on this part 2, and we're going to zero down again on some other things you can do to protect yourself from making a bad choice in who you rent to. Thanks very much for joining me on this video.